But let me say welcome again, as now more people are joining. My name is Carla Grados. I am co-head for Latin America at 60 Decibels, and I'm joined here today by Lucas Conrado, who is the executive director for the Estímulo Impact Fund. Lucas is going to have a bit more time to introduce himself and introduce Estímulo, but because we have a bit of a packed agenda, I'm going to kick us off straight away and share with you the main opening question of this session. As you can see in the screen, what if the most valuable thing for MSME impact, for micro, small, medium enterprise impact, isn't just access to capital? Why are we asking this, or why are we opening up with this question? Is because that's the question both Lucas and I had when Estímulo reached out to us, or we met through different people in a conference. Was Estímulo was giving out loans to MSMEs, but what if a loan is not enough, or it's not just the most valuable thing for MSME impact? What if you need something extra beyond capital alone? That is a question we set out to answer when we measure the impact of the Estímulo Impact Fund on MSME borrowers in Brazil. And today we're going to speak about that. We are going to share the insights of that study that happened a couple of years ago. And why today? Because today Estímulo, of course, has acted on those insights and has grown more. So they have more to share on the actions taken from an impact study. And I think that's super valuable, because impact studies should not be to just validate impact and archive. They should be to understand your impact and aim to improve it in any case or situation. So we're going to come back to this question at the end of the webinar. But let me first start by sharing the agenda for today. So first, for those of you who don't know us, I'm going to do a very brief introduction to 60 Decibels and the methodology we use for impact measurement and the methodology we applied for the Estímulo measurement. Then we're going to move over to Lucas, so he gives an introduction to Estímulo, to how Estímulo came about, and what does the future look like for Estímulo. And then we're going to go straight to the key insights. These insights are super relevant for anyone that is interested in MSME impact, again, in small or micro enterprise impact, although the focus of the study was straight on loans and some additional aspect to loans to MSMEs. There are very interesting findings that we got that go beyond, as I mentioned before, the simple access to capital. And I think it's super interesting to understand how this impact is also varied depending on the segment or the type of beneficiary or client you are, gender, even if you are a non-borrower, for example. That's something we really dive deeper into because of Estímulo's request. Then we're going to have a fireside chat with Lucas to dive deeper on the actions taken by Estímulo from this impact study. And then we're going to have, actually the Q&A is going to come before point 5, that is what this means for MSME impact more broadly. Why? Because we want to have your questions follow the fireside chat, so then we can conclude also considering your questions. That is the agenda for today. As I mentioned, it's a bit of a packed agenda. That's why I've gone straight ahead into sharing what are we going to talk about. And roughly the time we're going to spend is 5 minutes on the introductions, then around 10 minutes in the key insights, and 15-20 minutes in the fireside chat with Lucas. We might take a bit more time in some of the sections, as it usually happens, but that's why it's super important for you to add your questions in the Q&A section, because if we don't get to answer them, we will do our best to answer them afterwards when we finish the webinar and we share both this deck with you, as well as the questions and answers to the questions that we didn't get to answer during this live chat. So let's start. So 60 Decibels, I believe many of you might already know us. We are a global social impact measurement company, and we measure impact in a very particular way. It's a very agile, very human way, I would say, of measuring impact. It's not a quasi-experimental impact evaluation. What is the difference between both? That the quasi-experimental impact evaluation is really focused in understanding attribution and causality. Like I want to know that my intervention, created that impact. What we do is we analyze contribution. We want to know that that intervention is really contributing to the impact that is being experienced. And we can take it a step, let's say, forward in the process of trying to become more experimental by using a comparison group. And that's what we did actually in the Estímulo case. We used a comparison group. I'm going to share a bit more about that in a bit. But I would say generally, we measure impact via remote surveys, mainly via phone, in the local language of the person we're speaking with, in this case, in Portuguese, with Estímulo borrowers and non-borrowers as well. And we work with a mix of quantitative and qualitative questions. The quantitative ones are usually standardized. We apply them in the same way globally. So we build benchmarks and we're able to compare the results of a particular project with those benchmarks. So we did that for Estímulo. And the qualitative ones are open-ended and they allow us to understand the why behind the quantitative outcomes. Now, if we see that there was an increase in income or an increase in quality of life, then the open-ended question allows us to understand why or why not. And this is coded and is part of a statistically significant sample, so we know it's representative as well. So I would say this is a summary of how we work. If you're interested more about the methodology, you can Google 60 decibels lean data. There's a lot of open source content for you to look around. But when we do this double click on MSME impact, that's why we're here together today, we've measured around 129 projects globally on MSME impact. And this means for us, for our way of measuring, speaking with more than 36,000 MSMEs. So in this case, the MSMEs we spoke with because of Estímulo are part of this group of interviews. And when we speak about benchmarks, we compare to the MSME impact benchmark, we compare to the financial services benchmark, that is all the projects that have some sort of financial service or product, and we compare to the Latam benchmark. Those are all the projects that we've measured in Latin America. But now, and with this, I end this introduction and pass over to Lucas so he can introduce Estímulo. Let me just quickly tell you how we measured Estímulo, the methodology that we applied. So we applied, of course, the lean data methodology. We worked in a survey. It was around a 30-something question survey. It was 34 for borrowers and 35 for non-borrowers, applied by phone in Brazil in Portuguese. We asked about, so the questions in that survey, the KPIs in that survey are always divided in 3 sections: profile, impact, and experience. Profile allows us to segment the data. So to understand if impact is experienced differently by one segment versus the other. Impact, of course, are questions related to MSME impact. We're going to talk more about this, but we're talking from financial stress, quality of life, financial resilience, income, employment, in between others. And then experience is literally what that says. It's the satisfaction, the experience, the challenges, the NPS, for those who are familiar with Net Promoter Score. And why do we measure experience? Because if impact is really good, but experience is really bad, then you're not naturally scaling that impact, and vice versa. If the impact is really low, but the user experience is really positive, you're potentially scaling a risk. So that's why we always consider these 3 kind of sections. When did we apply this measurement? Between the end of 2024 and the beginning of 2025. So now there's been more than a year of Estímulo applying different actions and learning from the insights gathered. And a key part of this study is that we spoke both to borrowers and non-borrowers. So the first reason is because we wanted to compare the impact between those who had access to a loan versus those who didn't have access to a Estímulo loan, but also because Estímulo has an offering for non-borrowers. So we wanted to understand what the impact of that offering in non-borrowers was. Overall, we spoke to a little bit over 400 entrepreneurs, between borrowers and non-borrowers, and we aim for a 90% confidence level and a 5% margin of error of these findings on MSME impact. So that's a general introduction. Let me pass it over to Lucas now so he can introduce Estímulo to everyone here.
Hi, Carla. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me again. It's been a great joy working with 60 Decibels and sharing the results of the study. Um, I'd like to start with the problem we're trying to solve. Micro and small business in Brazil are the backbone of our economy. More than 24 million entrepreneurs across the country and roughly 95% of all active business in the country. Last year, micro and small business generated 70% of formal jobs. So they are a force of income, of resilience in communities across Brazil. And Brazil has a really robust financial market overall, with a lot of fintechs, a lot of technology involved. The challenge isn't always that the entrepreneur lacks access to finance. The challenge is that there are many moments where traditional finance simply doesn't work. That happens after a pandemic, after a climate disaster, during these economic shocks, when these entrepreneurs don't have enough collateral or credit history, when they're building a business in an underserved region. These are the moments where Estímulo operates. Estímulo is a nonprofit, and we build blended finance fund, mobilizing both philanthropic and commercial capital to expand access to affordable credit, finance, and business support to entrepreneurs. Since 2020, we've mobilized more than $85 million, supported over 6,000 entrepreneurs all across the country. It's a digital model, so we work all across. And we today operate two blended finance funds, one focused on productive and financial inclusion, and the other one focused on climate emergencies. This study with 60 decibels was about our first vehicle. And I think what really differentiates us isn't the model itself, but the belief and the support that we provide to the business beyond credit, the combination of capital and capacity. Uh, and that's what we wanted to understand from the impact measurement. So every entrepreneur who receives financing also has access to a training through WhatsApp, micro learning, such as Acumen does it, right, Carla? A lot of mentoring and an ongoing support. And even entrepreneurs that don't receive the loan can access these educational ecosystem. So that's what we wanted to understand. What was our value proposition to entrepreneurs that were non-borrowers? And and the whole philosophy of what we're doing wasn't obvious when we started with 60 decibels. Estímulo was born in 2020 in the early pandemic. And back then, our mission was really simple to get affordable credit to entrepreneurs as quickly as possible, to save companies and to save jobs. And success was measured by speed, mostly. A couple of years later, we started asking ourselves a different question. What is our value beyond this emergency when the emergency is over? And if the entrepreneurs are no longer facing this immediate crisis, are we simply a lender, a subsidized lender, or are we actually helping entrepreneurs build stronger business? And that question led us to 60 decibels. One of our investors, Right Capital, mentioned the work of 60 decibels. I met Carla at FLI in Mexico, and we started understanding whether our loans were creating impact. And I believe it was much more than we expected. Some findings confirmed what we believed. Others challenged our assumptions. And I think most important, they changed a lot of our strategy since then. So I think this is a bit of we want to share with you today.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Lucas. And it's super interesting that you gave that context because indeed we've seen how Estímulo has grown after the study and the focus you've had, and I think it's gonna be quite insightful to hear in the fireside chat after I present some of the key findings of the study. That, by the way, there is an article in Next Billion, also one in CNN in Portuguese, Brazil, for anyone who wants to dive deeper into the findings I'm going to present, but it's going to be super insightful to know exactly how the strategy changed based on these insights and what learnings do you have now. And before jumping in to the results at a glance, I am going to invite all of you again to please ask your questions in the Q&A. Thank you, David, for adding that more general, like a microcredit question in Latam, and to the anonymous attendee also for sharing their question. Once again, we're going to answer these at the end to the extent possible. And if we cannot answer them right now, we are gonna aim to answer them afterwards as the follow-up email, where we're also gonna add this the deck that we're presenting to you today. So let's start with the findings that we got at the beginning of last year about the borrowers and non-borrowers impact through the Estímulo loan. So first of all, let's just get like super high level results at a glance. What the capital did, like what did the loan actually achieve? And just again, as a small preview on how we ask questions, these are questions asked in a survey to a statistically significant and representative sample of borrowers and non-borrowers. They are called direct attribution questions. So we asked what changed in KPI X due to Estímulo. And we asked that same question to borrowers and non-borrowers because, as we mentioned, as Lucas mentioned, non-borrowers also had access to some level of support or training from Estímulo, even though they didn't get access to the loan. So what Capital did in general, it allowed, and in this case focused on borrowers, 72% to earn more, business growth, let's say, 76% to have a better business outlook, and 32%, that is super important, to be able to hire more staff. This is employment. This is an employment metric. So we can see that on general metrics that are relevant to MSME impact, the loan did have an impact. But something that is not here, and you can see this in the report, is that this was kind of on par with the Latam benchmark and the financial inclusion benchmark of all the hundreds of different projects that we've measured globally on lending or on MSME impact. Where we did see that Estímulo was way above the benchmark was on other metrics, and the particular one that really caught our attention was financial stress. And as you can see here, this is very much decreased. So when we ask a question, we always give a Likert scale for answer options. A Likert scale is very much increased, slightly increased, didn't change, slightly worsened, very much worse, nor decreased. And the very much allows us, or the top box allows us to see the significant change. And 37% very much decreased financial stress because of Estímulo was significantly above the benchmarks, the 60 decibels benchmarks. So this was a very surprising insight, and we're going to dive deeper into this. The NPS for borrowers was incredibly high, again, significantly high or above the benchmarks that we work with. And this, I'm going to leave it there and come back to it in the final insight, because as I mentioned at the beginning with the methodology, we ask open-ended questions where we allow people to explain fully freely why they consider their quality of life changed, if it improved, if it worsened. And the most frequent coded open-ended answer for borrowers was financial stress. Like, we didn't ask them about financial stress, they answered freely about financial stress. And that was a surprising insight. So let me just get to that at the end, but it is more about the impact going beyond access to capital and get into other aspects of, let's say, the entrepreneur life that we don't usually see when we don't ask about it. So let me go insight by insight. We're going to share 4 findings with you. Again, if you want more findings, please go ahead to the Next Billion or the CNN articles. And I'm going to ask Nadia, that is here from the 60 Decibels team, to share the link. I don't know if she already did, but if not, she's going to do it in a couple of seconds. So the first finding, super interesting finding. Women entrepreneurs report the strongest outcomes when we speak about borrowers. So if we only focus on the 200 borrowers we spoke with and different metrics, you can see here the metrics: quality of life, stress levels, financial management, ability to achieve a business goal, net promoter score, that is a measure of satisfaction or recommendation, and access. And by access, we mean no previous access to a loan similar or a financial service similar to Estímulo. Female clients significantly outperform male clients. And the main insight here is related to this no previous access point, where women are indeed experiencing more impact than men, or more women are experiencing positive impact in comparison to men. And we did certain correlations and also identified that indeed women are underserved. They're one of the most, and this is public knowledge, right? But the data is here speaking directly to this public knowledge that, for example, in the case of Estímulo, 24% of their client base back then were women, and they were the client segment experienced significantly more impact, which speaks to the fact that women arrive with less prior access to credit and leave with more improvement, right? And that is a contribution signal. It's not a coincidence. So that, I would say, is one of the first insights, and it will be interesting to speak to Lucas about if any work has been going on with the particular women's segment. Lucas, I want to ask you, should we wait to the fireside chat to speak about these questions? Yes, perfect. The second finding, and this is where we start seeing borrowers versus non-borrowers. So what you can see here are 2 spider charts taken straight from the report. The spider charts have 6 different KPIs that were relevant for Estímulo and for MSME impact: quality of life, business goal, financial management, business outlook, money earned, and stress levels. And what you can see here is a difference between borrowers and non-borrowers. It's, I would say, evident, or we should expect that when you have access to a loan, you're going to experience more impact than if you don't have access to a loan, right? What is interesting, though, is that non-borrowers did experience positive impact, even though they didn't have access to a loan. So when we go here to the second chart, and we see again the borrowers, the green line, and then we've divided non-borrowers in non-borrowers who had access to another loan versus non-borrowers who didn't have access to another loan. So of course, access to capital, and we don't want to move away from this, access to capital is super important. But access to capital is not the only thing that we need to focus on. What we are seeing here is access to capital creates more impact in this finding. However, if we go to the next finding, is where I would like to stay a bit longer, that is training, essentially. So as Lucas mentioned, they provide access to training to borrowers and non-borrowers alike. So in the case of borrowers, 15% of them mentioned using the training they had access to via Estímulo, versus 29% of the non-borrowers. This already shows that there is more interest from non-borrowers. Oh, I didn't have access to capital, but I have access to something else. I'm going to use it, right? For the borrowers that receive training, for these 6 KPIs that we selected here, we can see that there's like roughly no statistically significant difference in the impact between those that have had access to training versus those who didn't. Like, it's not a important differential in this particular case. But again, only 15% of the borrowers had access to or used the training they had access to. that could be an insight on how can we motivate, incentivize borrowers to also use the training they have access to. But when we go to the non-borrowers, these are only non-borrowers, and we are comparing the non-borrowers who received training versus the non-borrowers that did not, let's say, use the training. Because again, all of them had access to training. We're comparing the ones who used it versus the ones who didn't use it. And the green line is the ones who used it. And you can see again the significant difference in the usage or the impact of using the training in financial management, which makes sense because you're receiving training for your financial management, in business outlook, maybe not in business goals because, well, you didn't have access to capital, but significant difference in quality of life. And we're going to see the coded answers of why later. Financial stress tends to be more related, of course, to now I have access to capital, but also money earned. So it's interesting to know that non-borrowers were able to earn more money from their perception attributed to a Estímulo training, even though they didn't have access to a loan. What is this showing us? That even if you don't have access to capital, training has impact. However, even though everyone has access to that training, only 29% used it. And this is like an insight in itself. How can we, maybe how even the process of saying you didn't have access to the loan is a, let's say, financial education process in itself, right? Of giving access to training because we can see training has an impact. And then the last finding that we're going to share with you, and again, there are many more in the different public articles that Estímulo has shared and the public deck, is the stress reduction and well-being. When we do MSME impact, we tend to measure the metrics that are more relevant to funders in MSME impact. These are business growth, employment. These are the metrics that funders usually want. But we always try to measure quality of life or well-being, and we always try to measure financial stress. Quality of life because it gives us insights into what quality of life is for them and what is changing in this quality of life due to, in this case, the Estímulo loan or training. And financial stress because, believe it or not, it is a super important metric globally when we speak about financial well-being. And there's a whole article in the World Bank explaining this, and we're going to share a link to this article in the next slide and share it in the deck with you. But what we can see here is this is Estímulo borrowers and Estímulo non-borrowers. And as you can see, of course, as I mentioned before, borrowers have more impact than non-borrowers. But where what we see is that in both cases, there is a positive impact in well-being metrics and financial stress metrics. More so if we compare it to, in the particular case of stress levels, to the global 60 dB benchmark and the Latam lending benchmark. You can see here that the Latam lending benchmark reduces financial stress significantly by 7%, and in the global one by 15%. Estímulo very much decreased it by 37%. So that is, or apologies, 37% of their borrowers experienced a significant decrease in their financial stress. So this finding is super relevant. We're gonna double click on it on the next slide. But what I wanna show you here is the quality of life metric, this first metric. This is how we literally ask the question. Has your quality of life changed because of Estímulo? And then the Likert scale. And of course, borrowers are speaking to everything they experience, the loan and the training, and non-borrowers are speaking to the training mainly, right? And we see here 32% very much improved. And in this case, 19% very much improved. And we go to the next slide, we see the why, the coded answers of why they experience that improvement in quality of life. And without asking them about financial stress, the most frequent answer from borrowers was reduced stress levels, 61%. And we're going to share again this deck, and you can read more about why financial stress is important, but it's directly related to managing unexpected expenses, breaking the cycle of poverty, lowering anxiety levels in long-term planning, investing in education, fostering business growth. Like financial stress is a central item. And it's super interesting to see that this kind of packaged access that Estímulo gave with loans and trainings is directly related to this reduction in financial stress. And in the case of non-borrowers that have access to training, they spoke about financial stability that is also quite related to financial stress. And here you can see the stress levels, and definitely stress levels are more positively impacted by access to capital. No, there is no doubt in that from what we see. So those are the four insights. Just like an opening part of the conversation. And now we're gonna go to the fireside chat with Lucas. As you can see, we're already having many questions. I hope that we're able to read them once we finish the fireside chat, all of them. But don't forget to vote on the ones that are more interesting for you, because then we're gonna be able to grab those that, well, that are relevant for most of the audience. So, Lucas, first of all, before jumping on to the first questions, any high-level reaction to the insights that we just shared?
I'm sorry, I was looking at the Q&A here. But well, a lot of insights. It's great to see it again. I think one question that you proposed was why we chose to listen to the declined applicants, to the non-borrowers, right, Carla?
Yeah.
And
I would say that that is my first question when we started discussing this report was, why do you want to listen to applicants you essentially said no to? And it's super important from a learning perspective, but I would love to know from the Estímulo side, why so much focus, the same level of focus on the denied applicants, let's say.
I believe that as lenders, we naturally spend a lot more time looking at the borrowers, default rates and conversion rates, and the NPS of these borrowers. But if our mission is financial inclusion, we also need to understand the ones that are still excluded, and why we are not reaching them. And and I think the study made us realize that the credit relationship shouldn't be the only one, shouldn't be the end of the relationship, the denial or the approval of the credit. Many of the entrepreneurs were actually not ready for credit, but they were still looking for guidance, for practical support. Um, Most of them were participating in our mentorships, so they were looking for a pathway to become credit ready, and we needed to look that. So I think the insight fundamentally changed how we think about the role of Estímulo. So instead of asking, how do we lend to more entrepreneurs? How do we increase disbursements? We started asking, how do we help more entrepreneurs become ready for capital? And so we redesigned a lot of the journey for declined applicants. We are creating an AI-enabled pathways that combine business diagnosis, personalized training, and also ongoing support for the entrepreneurs that were almost ready to get credit. Um, we are also expanding our entrepreneurial support to these non-borrowers together with large corporations. So
Okay.
we're working closely with, for example, with Ambev, food and beverage distributor, energy companies such as Energisa, Localiza, which is a big mobility business in Brazil, and also iFood, which is a food digital platform, to deliver tailored capacity building programs within their value chain or local communities. Because for most of the non-borrowers that were not ready for credit, you have to really understand their pain. And if you're looking through a large corporation value chain or a region, a territory, a local community that the company wants to build credit access, it's much easier to understand the pains and to deliver a training model closely related to their pains. So it's more likely that they will be ready for credit when you do a personalized training for them. So in many of these programs, credit is not it's no longer their starting point of the relationship. We go through education, and we also work not only with credit but also with seed capital. Most of the entrepreneurs are not ready to take a loan at first. So you have seed capital that has to be invested in the company, that has to be a business plan, and then we hopefully in the long run, this will entrepreneur will be ready for credit from Estímulo. So so we pay much more attention to the entrepreneurs we don't finance at this point. And I think the ambition here is not simply to approve more loans, is to help more entrepreneurs become investment ready.
And that's actually super interesting, and I'm gonna connect it to the next question on experience, right? So these surveys, although in this case we work with a comparison group between borrowers and non-borrowers, um, we still work with as we call it, direct attribution or perception surveys, and they are very useful to include experience metrics such as NPS and correlate the impact metrics with the experience metrics. And in the case of NPS, I would imagine now that with everything that you've deployed with non-borrowers, this would have definitely changed. But back then, you had record high NPS from our benchmarks globally at 85 with borrowers. And then, as expected, you had minus 19 for non-borrowers, because of course, if you're denied a loan, you're not really going to recommend. But still, even though you had minus 19, you had a 29% uptake of the training that you were offering. So I guess connecting to what you just shared, do you feel that by increasing the, let's say, denial experience and not talking to it about a denial experience, but more of like, let's get you loan ready or even investment ready before, or depending on your model, let's say on the entrepreneur's model, this NPS would increase because they wouldn't feel like, oh, I am applying to something that I might be denied from, but as opposed to I am being part of a journey where I can learn from. And then this 29% uptake of training would actually go higher, and therefore the impact in those entrepreneurs would grow. So would you say NPS is a key metric to increase the uptake of trainings that will in hand improve the impact metrics?
That's a great question. We are actually looking at, I think the biggest metric here is disbursement after the educational program. We're mainly looking at non-borrowers that were when you we have two programs. We have the fund, which is like a it's like a fintech. Anyone can come in whenever they want, and we have the education the educational programs tailored to specific communities. For the fund, we are actually looking at the disbursement after education. So some of the entrepreneurs don't get access to credit for it's minor adjustments in their company that could make them prepared for credit. So we're looking at the disbursement rate as the first indicator, but NPS is a great alternative as well, because I think one of the clearest message from the study is that the non-borrowers were dissatisfied because they didn't understand the decision.
Yes.
They wanted transparency. They wanted to understand why they were not approved and what they could do to be approved. So I think this is what we are aiming here, giving him a track, an educational track for them to have more chances to be approved. So the credit decision alone doesn't damage the relationship itself. It's the communication, it's the clarity, it's the respect throughout the journey. So we are still refining. There's a lot of refinements to do, but really looking closely to the rejection experience. And today, the entrepreneurs receive an immediate feedback explaining a bit more about the main reasons they were rejected, together with some practical recommendations. And also, we partnered last year with Sebrae. Sebrae is an I think the kind of government-backed organization focused on small business, and they have um, they support small business all across the region. They have their own offices, and they our okay our support comes with their educational. So whenever an entrepreneur is not approved, we send them to consultants from Sebrae that can also help him make a better business decision and improve their investment rate.
Yeah, thank you, Lucas. And that I think adds to the point that the denial process is an education process in itself, or should be seen as an education process in itself. And I guess something that we didn't mention in the insights was that we also ask follow-up open-ended questions after the NPS. And as Lucas is mentioning, the negative ones were mostly related to, well, lack of understanding on the reasons of why the denial. And that over communicating can be helpful to increasing the NPS and therefore increasing the uptake of the recommendations and therefore increasing the impact. Um, so again, just an insight on why to always measure, because you're already using this kind of surveys, you can add the direct attribution impact questions, side by side experience questions as NPS. And let me move from non-borrowers to women, because we saw in the Estímulo case there was a significant difference in positive impact perceived by women entrepreneurs for these loans on their MSMEs or their micro small businesses. Uh, However, we did see that the smaller percentage, let's say the smaller segment of Estímulo's database or client base were women. Um, my question here is, first of all, did this surprise you that the gender impact or the impact perceived by women was higher due to lower access, as we also confirmed? And would you say keeping a smaller database of women to target those interventions is the way you would go forward, or you would increase the access that you are providing to women entrepreneurs to increase the overall impact experienced by your client database?
Definitely increasing. We already identified women as a strategic priority. That's why we chose to understand this group together with 60 Decibel. But I think the study gave us much stronger evidence why we should focus on this group. And when we combined the findings of the 60 decibels impact measurement together with our own portfolio data, which showed that women-led business have around 30% lower default rates than men, we realized that this wasn't just an inclusion opportunity, but also a portfolio opportunity, performance portfolio opportunity. So we decided to act on these conclusions. We strengthened our origination through women business networks. We built capacity building tracks focused on women needs. We established internal lending targets. So the team has targets to increase the share of women in our portfolio. And we also redefined our credit policy to better reflect the credit profile and remove unnecessary barriers to approval for women entrepreneurs. So, and that I think it was the biggest change. It increased a lot of the approval for women, is looking at the credit policy. So, and those initiatives are all coming together now at this moment because we are building a blended finance vehicle designed specifically for women entrepreneurs. The fund is backed by women philanthropists from Brazil and impact investors in Brazil, combining affordable credit, but with mentorship. And the mentorship will be done by peer networks of women supporters, women mentors. So we're building a big universe here around gender. And I think this is a great example of how the study influenced our impact measurement and also our strategy.
And thank you for that detail, Lucas. And I asked the question in that way because I've had different conversations with financial service providers that mention, no, we are purposefully focusing on a small women database or client base because we want to learn from them and we want to improve. But it is well known that women are underserved. Unserved in many cases and underserved in many others when it comes to access to capital. But we also know that access to capital is not tailored for women. But if you tailor it for women, of course, they're great clients. And you just mentioned it, there's a business case on repayment. Repayment sometimes is tied to certain risks of stop paying other aspects of the household life, and that's why it needs to be coupled with training or mentoring. And it's great that in your case you're considering women mentors, but this is also a sort of, let's say, motivation from our end, having measured a lot of MSME impact projects or lending projects, from MSME loans to microcredit, like smaller loans. In our case, I saw a question somewhere there on the difference. When we measure microcredit, we consider loans that are below $5,000. In this case, we're not talking about microcredit, we're talking about MSME lending.
Yeah,
Um,
most of it. The first ticket is $2,000.
so you have a bit of
Initial.
microcredit there. Yeah.
Yeah.
But my point here is when you focus on women, you of course have to focus on women. You have to tailor your offering to women, but there is a big underserved market there that can be a positive business market, but always coupled with this training, additional support that we are mentioning. And I guess we are running out of time. Let me jump into the Q&A from the audience. So I'm gonna look on the ones that have been most voted. Let's see here. Well, David was the first one to share. David, White House journalist writing from Devex. Do you see signs of increasing microcredit stress in Latin America? Are NPS likely to worsen? If so, where and what can be done to reduce it? David, this is a great question. This is a very microcredit focused question. If you agree with it, I'm happy to answer it separately in text and share it to everyone as a response of this webinar. We are gonna, or the data that we have comes from our experience in microcredit, microfinance. That is our strongest work. But in this case, we are considering microcredit and loans that are above the, let's say, the microcredit line that we consider globally. So I'm just gonna go on to, or actually, I want to go back to Lucas and ask you, do you differentiate the treatment that you give to those that have access to microloans versus those that have access to bigger loans? I think you mentioned you give up to 40K loans, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, 50K at
50K.
this moment. Uh, we don't, but that would be a big, a nice insight.
Yeah, I think that's
Micro, you understand from 2 to 5, right?
in our case, in 60
Below
decibel,
5.
we below 5, we consider microcredit, above 5, no longer. And thank you, David. So, well, you had your answers from Lucas. They currently don't differentiate. I think it would be that's a segmentation we did not apply, and I think that's an insight from you to us to apply that segmentation based on the data back then and the current data. What we see, we do see different behaviors, significantly different behaviors in microcredit impact versus um, average credit impact, depending on the size of the loan. And within microcredit, there's a lot of subsegments starting by group lending that tend to be the smallest one of those. Um, so if you're interested, David, happy to dive deeper into that in a separate conversation. Okay, next voted one. Lucas, which finding genuinely surprised you the most, and what decision did it change?
I think the training outcomes. I think borrowers didn't perceive training as strongly as we expected, and non-borrowers experienced training uh, way more than we expected. So we combine the training outcomes from 60 decibels together with our analysis. Earlier this year, we analyzed more than 6,000 contracts and found the entrepreneurs that participated in mentoring, in business training, or educational programs showed 48% last default rates across all the different credit scores. So I think it doesn't prove casuality, but it raises an important question that maybe the issue isn't training works, but maybe when and how it creates value. That's where we decided redesigning our entrepreneurial journey. So instead of offering like this big, broad, general training throughout the relationship, we're concentrating on deeper interventions before credit and right after the credit is disbursed through the grace period. So when entrepreneurs are making the most important investment decisions. So that's how we are seeing we are uh, decreasing portfolio risk is by really deepening the interventions in specific moments. And outside of these moments, really relying on much behavior nudges and behavioral uh, changes, basically. And we are on the other side, we are expanding the tailored programs. As I mentioned, together with Ambev, Localiza, and Energisa, together with companies and specific territories, because that's when we understand we can apply more value to the specific segments that need support. So basically, the study, at first, the study challenged our training offer, but that didn't make us invest less in training. It did the exact opposite. We invested way more intentionally.
In training. Thank you, Lucas. I see a next voted one with three on an anonymous attendee on RCT literature and microcredit. It's a super interesting question on what RCTs find on microcredit. You mentioned, although this is not focused on microcredit, let me just go through the question because it has three votes. So the RCT literature on microcredit, including the Compartamos trial in Mexico, tends to find business revenue growing while profit and household income effects coming close to zero. Your 72% trend is much higher. So the 72% was on business income, not household income. So it's related in that case to microcredit, but you have access to the public deck on the Next Billion report, so you can dive deeper into those findings. However, there are differences, of course, between RCTs and lean data. RCTs are the golden standard of measurement. And although they are very complex to apply, they are very necessary to fully confirm causality and attribution. What I would say is when you want to, just to address the question on the gaps that we many times find between RCT results and lean data results, is the complementarity of lean data is not only the agility and accessibility of applying this measurement, but mostly focused on understanding the why behind the experiences of the, in this case, borrowers. So an RCT doesn't allow us to have qualitative open-ended questions to the statistically significant sample that the RCT is surveying. In this case, that why, for example, is how we identified that financial stress was such a common positive outcome to improving quality of life. So I would say, how do they complement each other? RCTs are absolutely necessary to confirm causality, but lean data allows us to identify contribution and understands the why or the reasons behind that contribution without needing to go to in-depth interviews that sometimes tend to be anecdotal because they don't come from a representative sample. That's just like a methodological input, but we'll make sure to answer it more in depth in the follow-up email. And we have 3 minutes. I'm going to share all of the questions with Lucas. If you added, I see comments in the chat. We're also going to share all those comments with Lucas. Lucas, I don't know if we can have a bit of your time at some point this week to answer some of those questions directed to you. Yes, thank you. And we're going to come back next week to all of you that attended with both Lucas's answers to the questions and the 60 decibels answers to those questions. So if you have any additional question right now that didn't got answered, please add it there. We'll make sure to answer it. It's a promise. And let me just quickly share back my screen. Give me one sec. So we can close this with some final, let's say, findings. 3 things that the Estímulo data says about the opening question, that should we go beyond access to capital for MSMEs or not? We should definitely. And the first one I would say is the loan reduced pressure. It didn't just finance growth. And we thank you to someone who shared the financial stress article from the World Bank. You can see there why reducing that pressure is so important. Training mattered the most where capital was absent. So how can we share training? How, if any of you are giving loans to MSMEs, how can the training be part of the denial process, right? Or how can we increase, as Lucas mentioned, the NPS of that denial process so the training offered afterwards is actually taken, no? Because there is a good satisfaction with the whole process. And this is connected to the third finding, the process of rejection can be part of the training product in itself. And again, we're going to share this with you, but these are some questions that we're going to leave with you that we tend to receive from funders on why we select certain metrics when we measure MSME impact or MSME loan impact. Just a summary, are you providing first access or are you substituting an access that is already there with better quality offering? Does revenue, is there revenue impact but also impact on employment? Does the financial service relieve pressure? Are women or underserved populations reached and reached well? I would say that's like the key part. I saw a comment there on the chat that there is also many struggles when it comes to agency, right? Women is not only about access to women, but the correct access to women. Sometimes women have access, but they feel challenged by family members, husbands, to have access to a loan. So there's a whole support network around the access to women. And is a non-financial support landing? If yes, why? If not, why not? And what can we do about it? And just we've measured a lot of MSME impact or financial services impact in this platform called Signal. I think to the question from David, some of the insights that we can gift you right now from this Signal platform when it comes to MSME impact is here on this image. And if anyone is interested, happy to share a bit more later. But for example, this is a database of all the companies that have decided to be part of this platform called Signal. So we've measured 48 companies, 90 projects. So some of these companies we've measured twice, and more than 22,000 MSME respondents. We see here some of the metrics that we tend to always ask, again, for different reasons, because relevant MSME frameworks ask us to ask these questions, and sometimes because of funder interest. But what we did here is just like divide the projects from Asia and Latin America on 6 selected metrics out of all of these. And I think an interesting finding to leave you with is that there is, when you see the yellow one, this is again data from Latam, we can see that MSMEs are experiencing higher impact but lower access in Latin America, whilst in Asia, there is higher access to MSME support and loans, but a bit not really statistically significant, but a bit lower perceived impact. And that might be because there are more opportunities, more alternatives to choose from. What is the finding here? How can we increase access, quality access to MSME support and loans in Latin America? And in the case of Asia, how can we there's already access, how can we improve the quality of that access? That's it. Thank you so much to Lucas first for your time, for answering the questions, and for the future time you're gonna give us answering the additional questions that we've received. We've received a lot. And thank you to all of you who stayed until the end. We're super appreciative. Feedback is more than welcomed. If you want to share any feedback with us on how to make these webinars better, it's fully welcomed. And once again, thank you to Lucas and Estímulo for sharing the results, both positive and the ones that were not so positive, but they improved based on this study with us today. There's not many companies that publicly share their results, so thank you, Estímulo, for that as well. And back to you, Lucas, to close the session.
Thank you, Carla. I think if I could leave with one message, it would be that don't think as impact measurement as a just a reporting exercise, but as a strategic tool, like to really change the way you perceive your operation. That really changed. It's not easy to learn that bad things about your project, like things that were not as good as you wished, but it really changes on how your impact is delivered. And looking ahead, I think really close to what Rafael from IDB posted on the chat. We are looking to be a living laboratory for inclusive finance. So testing new ideas, measuring that works, and sharing those lessons with the field, with other financial institutions. We're not going to close the financial gap alone. So we are really interested in building this next generation of financial inclusion. We are constantly looking for philanthropic investment and strategic partnerships, especially from outside of Brazil. So I would love to continue the conversation. I'm going to leave my email here, and anyone that wants to continue, I'll be happy to talk to.
And Lucas, would you be open to sharing your email then on the follow-up email?
Sure, of
Yeah,
course.
amazing. So if anyone wants to contact Lucas to learn from what Estímulo learned, and you're also an MSME MSME loan
Blender.
lender or supporter, or of course, if you want to support Estímulo's growth, please do write to Lucas. And thank you so much for joining. Thank you, Lucas, once again, and thank you everyone for staying until this time.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye.
Bye bye. Ciao, ciao.